This is going to probably likely make some noise, so we'll wait for this to make its noise before we start.
Oy, oy, oy.
This is going to probably likely make Oh, there's the noise. All right. I think that means audio is working good. All right. Let's hope we don't have any more technical difficulties.
Oh, so that's the one that's delayed, huh?
Yeah, that's what people are actually seeing right now.
Oh, okay.
All right. Welcome to another Napa Jordan Peterson podcast, as I say. We're not affiliated with Jordan Peterson anyway. We're a weekly meetup group here in Napa, California that gets together. Let's see, do I go this way? Nope, not that way. Definitely this way. We get together every week and we discuss the ideas, videos, and the content that Jordan Peterson produces and the ideas loosely around that. And we have various discussions, and we do that kind of in a private meetup every week. And then on Saturday nights, we try to get together with who's ever willing and have larger conversations in front of the public about it. Mm-hmm. And to put our ideas out there, see what's good, see what stinks, and get your guys' input. So that's what we're here tonight doing. We didn't have much prep tonight. It's a little chaotic, having some microphone difficulties, but hopefully you guys can hear us and not my chair.
Yeah, we'll see.
So where to start? That's something we forgot to discuss earlier.
Yeah, we've been technical difficulties up till now, so I don't know.
Well, this week we did the Munk Debates, which had Jordan Peterson, Stephen Fry defending anti-political correctness, as I'll call it, mm-hmm. and Michelle Goldberg and Michael Dyson on the side of pro political correctness. Mm-hmm. And we listened to, I think, the last introduction, which was Stephen Fry. Is that this week?
Yeah, it was Stephen Fry. Yep.
Yeah, we discussed that, and then we did start on the first couple back and forth too, right? The actual debate started.
I don't remember that actually.
Okay,
I mean, I've seen it before, but I don't remember this time in this cycle. So.
Okay.
I don't know. Was there something that would take away from you for Fry?
Left versus the right isn't debate. I thought that was very good to frame it that way. That it's not. You know, Stephen Wright tried to make it, or Stephen Fry, not Stephen Wright. Stephen Fry tried to make it clear that, you know, he's not on the right side, or not, you know, he's left-leaning, not right-leaning, and that this issue shouldn't be viewed as a left versus right thing. And I thought that was probably more accurate. If I had to pick an axis, it's more authoritarian maybe versus libertarian type of axis. But there are other political compasses you can throw it against.
Yeah.
And then he went on to list things he liked about political correctness and things he didn't like about it. I guess is the best way to put it. And to a certain part, he said he didn't like the preachiness, the piety, self-righteousness, the inquisitioning, and he was against bullying and intolerance.
Censoriousness. Mm-hmm. But I don't think he was saying that he listed like bullying and what are the few other things? Bullying and racism and homophobia and misogyny as things that he assumed everybody, the four in the panel, would probably agree are bad things. But he just felt like political correctness is not the way to go about doing something about that. But I remember I found that strange, though, because just calling whatever he's calling misogyny, homophobia, racism is, in a way, assuming a lot, I think. That's probably not the case, because if you call something homophobia, then you've already decided that negative feelings about homosexuality are a sickness and are wrong. But that is kind of the debate, right? And in terms of misogyny, if you call certain actions or certain attitudes about women's role in the world, if you call that misogyny, you are assuming again that essentially a progressive worldview is correct and a conservative view is probably not correct.
And we tried to also talk about homophobia. What does that exactly mean? There's like a technical definition where there's like fear of gays almost, right? The fear of that type of behavior or being near that type of person. Mm-hmm. It's kind of a broad definition technically, and then if we get how do we use it as like I said, it's more like negative feelings or negative comments or negative words or phrases or it's almost like it's an umbrella that we use to mean a bunch of different things. So it's tough to have precision about it, and that way, without the precision, it's hard to have a meaningful conversation about that and find out what he really means by those statements.
Yeah, because if you want to have a dialogue with conservatives about that, you would need some kind of other term for their negative judgments about homosexuality, because otherwise you're just right off the bat assuming, well, you're wrong and you're sick by hating gay people.
And you can take, well, and that's the other thing too, I think, is kind of like, well, is it good versus evil, bad versus good, is what is negative here exactly? Mm-hmm. If their position is, I don't think society should encourage this type of behavior in public because it might have a negative impact on our offspring, that's not necessarily negative feelings about it. It's just they don't think it should be encouraged in public. I mean, there's a whole spectrum there.
Why wouldn't those be negative feelings about it?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Some people might consider those negative feelings. Others might not. They think it's just in society's best interest, including all groups, that to propagate society, that these behaviors should be, kept in private, which really has nothing to do with your sexual preference. It's just like, don't be sexually active in public, basically, that type of. But
what do you mean by sexually active? Actually having intercourse in public?
Yeah, right.
Or hugging and kissing.
Yeah, hugging and kissing, I guess, would be the complaint from the conservatives.
Well, those are negative feelings about it. I'm not sure where you're going with that.
Well, I'm saying,
I don't think anyone would disagree.
Oh, I think there would be a conservative saying that it's necessarily negative feelings if they're asking for some self-control on that. And I think
saying that if you don't want a display of romantic attraction between people of the same sex in public, that's a negative judgment against homosexuality.
But if
that's not but I'm saying but the word homophobia is a different thing. That's a judgment about the negative feelings. Yeah. So there's nothing wrong with negative feelings. I'm just saying that's not the same as judging the negative feelings as bad.
But my point was more to the fact that the people on the right might not be asking for specific rules against gays specifically. They might just say, I don't want any public affection in public because that will.
Well, those are rules specifically against.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Is it's regardless of sexual orientation, they just hold that position.
Oh no! I mean, like no holding hands.
Yes, in public, or no kissing in public, something like that.
In America. I mean, is there anyone worth talking? I mean, is there really a percentage that's even remotely significant in the United States that doesn't want straight people to hold hands in public?
I'm sure it's a very small percentage. I don't think it's significant. In the land of liberty, we'd want to enable that.
So I don't think it's significant.
Mm-hmm. Okay. But like I said, back to the point, it's these ill-defined terms. What did Stephen Fry mean by homophobia?
Misogyny and racism.
One of the things I wrote was that feel, think, say are kind of like protected. We should be able to feel anything we want to feel. We should be able to think whatever we want to think. When that's part of saying too. Linking Peterson does a good job of linking how important it is to say our thoughts out loud. But there's definitely limitations on that because you can't say, fire in a theater and so forth. So where there is limitations is this, it's a dialogue that both sides of the aisles are having to, it shouldn't be, like I said, it's not left versus right. It's this conversation that society's having about what's in our best interest. And this particular debate is, political correctness. Should you be allowed to be politically incorrect, maybe is the question. And when and where, and
what does it mean? I mean, I think throughout the debate they once in a while mention that no one's defining it, or they don't have a common definition of it. I don't know. So what do we, you and I, mean by political correctness?
Yeah, exactly. It would have been nice if they had kicked off the debate and have it defined so we got everyone on the same page. But and it's sometimes during the night it feels like they're all talking about different things, and
Yeah.
it feels like they sometimes take past content from said speakers like Peterson and then try to bring it into the debate, even though it wasn't. I mean, it was previously mentioned on the topic, but it wasn't, brought up that night. I guess that's them bringing it up.
Yeah,
as an
it
example.
became pretty personal pretty quickly, unfortunately. I mean, that would have been, I think it's appropriate to bring in his views, but it was done a little bit, I think, too personally, and then that kind of soured the whole thing, I think.
Yeah, and it's
certainly soured him. He is, I mean, he can look kind of grim, but throughout this one, he looks bitter, verging on mean and sour. It's like quite a stunning. He's just like seems to be, like brimming with. I don't know.
Yeah, he doesn't look well,
hatred, almost hatred.
but it's also his thinking face. If you watch his other things too, it's kind of like when he's in his head, he kind of like
maybe yeah. So
it's tough to call. And after a bit, it's definitely his anger face because they definitely take lots of shots at him. So his disposition, clearly, is
but I don't see him as innocent.
Not angelic the entire time.
For the public who's listening, I don't consider Peterson innocent by any means. I think he deserves that, but it doesn't help in a debate to make it personal.
And there was no room or format where they could go, can you clarify what you said or thought?
Yeah.
And he gets a rebuttal, but after they've already said, you said this, and this was your intent, and this is why it's wrong, he doesn't have, it's hard to pick apart the beginning of that because you really need to address the end of that because that's where the debate's happening.
Yeah.
You can't just say your assumption is wrong.
Yeah.
It's a tough format to deal with. It really is, especially like I said when things aren't defined well. And so they were going back and forth. Let's see. Yeah, we talked about all sorts of things, but that's pretty much where we got off rails on just talking about.
There were three. I think it was something I said that you liked, but I don't remember what it was. Like there were three things, or three steps, or four.
Oh, it said if we were to, how did we go down that path? Let's see. I have right versus effective, conformity, orthodoxy, certainty. Not sure about PC. I don't know what that's about. Mentally ill that skin color matters. That's a note I wrote down.
I don't remember that.
Force of law, and somehow we got on the topic of what's the proper way for society to bring about change, because I think we were talking about a little bit about activism and history, and we got on we really need society to be empathetic to each other as kind of the broad strokes, and then we got into some specific steps. We said, well, let's bring it to everyone's attention, so you even if you're ignorant of it, you can have some awareness, like, hey, look, you need to pay attention to this because this does hurt others. So
consciousness raising is the old term for it.
Consciousness raising, all right. I like Peterson's term, bringing it to attention, because he talks about awareness and all our senses turn into our consciousness, right? It affects our lived experience as soon as we're aware of that. And it's kind of tough because it's like the more things we're aware of and we're feeling, it's like can be overloading, right? Sometimes we have to develop some callousness against it.
Yeah, for sure.
The next thing we said was to create some content and try to inform societal norms, I think maybe. And that was trying to tell stories about how ignorance of these topics can affect others and the world around you. So there was creating content, which might be films, movies, same things. Films, movies, books, just stories in general is one way. Even news, writing about the real world issues. Yeah, it's good. Computer's going to do weird stuff.
Okay.
I can still see around it though. So
I guess we were circling, as so often happens, around the progressive conservative duality there, and certainly Peterson most of the time is defending the value of what one can loosely call a conservative point of view, I think, and the idea of, basically you don't just willy-nilly decide to change society because chances are, for some reason, things are the way they are, and maybe for a good reason. Whereas progressives tend to think that, sure, things are the way they are, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're good, and they haven't been good for lots of people, so why not change them? So it's hard to know, and it's a big question. So it kind of reminds me of that prayer. What is it? Lord, help me to have the courage to change what I can change and accept what I can't accept, and the wisdom to know the difference. Right?
Yeah, it's like a serenity prayer from Saint Francis or something.
But the important thing is, but there's something missing in that prayer. It's like it's not the courage
to let go of the things I cannot control, something along those lines.
Yeah, but the thing that's missing in there is not to ask for the courage to change what I can change, but to change the courage to change what should be changed. Because we can change a lot of things that maybe shouldn't be changed, and I think that is the more interesting question that I wish Peterson and whoever he hates and and Peterson's enemies, that thing, those two groups would focus instead on the question. So we can change a lot of things, and what should be changed and why.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of explore that idea together, as opposed to just saying, well, you shouldn't change anything, or you should change everything. And no one really says that. No, it's a straw man argument on both sides. Conservatives never say you should never change anything at all. And progressives are never really about changing anything willy-nilly. There's reasons for what they want to change and what they want to conserve. So that would be, in my opinion, that's the interesting discussion to have.
Yeah.
Instead of the bitter back and forth polemics.
And in the age of the internet and global communication, you have a lot of media writing articles, clickbait articles to get eyeballs, and it's all outrage culture where it tries to bring you in because, can you believe they said this? And it, like you said, it necessarily doesn't really exist, or it's a minority, or.
And even the people who sort of consciously have very extreme views, virtually every single time, if you gave them enough time and enough in the right environment and you just talk to them long enough, you'd be able to pull out nuance and different ideas and stuff. So there's this idea that that even if someone appears to be a fanatic, if you react to them as a fanatic instead of trying to probe and find something different, that's just a dead end.
Yeah, I think most people are more moderate than we realize or think, especially if you talk to them, especially across the aisle, like left and right. You actually get in serious non-status seeking conversation. You get down to it, you realize there's really not that much differences on a lot of different topics, and where there are differences, there's reasoning for it, and the conversation usually grinds to a halt because there's both issues to talk about and consider that I hadn't heard. And that's why it's important for the dialogue to continue.
Yeah, and I think that was Michael, what's his name, Fry?
Stephen Fry.
That was Stephen Fry's main point, I think. He was just bemoaning the fact of the outrage culture, that no one can hear the other side, and no one wants to hear the other side, which is too bad.
I had a thought, I lost it. Yeah, so by creating new content, we can kind of like define a new societal rules by informing and making people aware. And then that pushes and influences behavior. As soon as groups of behavior change, hopefully that will propagate if everyone feels it's valid. And I think that's where some of the disagreement comes into play too, because everyone's got so many different values that not everyone's going to be accepting of the change. And I think that's right. The tough part. There's a lot of issues even outside the culture war that, where there are people that are going to be accepting and empathetic, and other people are just going to be callous.
And I think it's literally impossible for everyone to get their way.
Mm-hmm.
It just isn't the case. It's that's one of the realities of a democratic republic as well. It's like, the majority does rule ultimately, with checks and balances to protect the minority, but the majority rules, and that's it. And otherwise, it's the minority that rules. So if the minority prevents the majority from getting what it wants, then it's the minority in charge. So, and I'm not sure there's a way around that. It's like, you can always aim for getting everybody what they want, and I think we can go much, much further in that direction.
Yeah, I think that's the better aim, is try to get as many people included as possible.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, you have to understand why the system we have exists currently. Why the reasons it's there, and you have to change it and remember all the reasons the things are there in the first place. Like you have to be aware of that. To add another constraint, you have to know the prior constraints, and that way you can cover those cases too, and so you don't remove a foundational brick or affect society in a negative way either, because it could all come off the rails very easily, faster than we all think sometimes.
Yeah.
Watch like Nazi Germany, how fast that society changed in less than 10 years. It shows the potentials there, so we have to treat the past with respect and knowledge. Why we aim to change things. The change is going to happen, and it's up to us to make sure that it happens in a way that's beneficial to everyone. And the more people it's beneficial to, I think the better outcome we get, and the faster we can improve society and lift everyone up.
I think the kind of quote-unquote change of Nazi Germany, though, was sort of the dark side of conservative. It's the yearning for what has been before. In their minds, anyway, what has been up to now. So, like, make America great again, make Deutschland great again. That phrase is kind of
nostalgic.
Well, yeah, and when it becomes politicized, then that is the open door to fascism. That's kind of like, so it's a kind of change, but it's not progressive change. It's not change to something different. It's a change to protect certain people's privileges that have had them up to now.
Yeah, I think obviously it wasn't just the slogan itself that changed everything, or propaganda. Propaganda does have a huge influence. So it's not the one thing by itself. It's a bunch of different factors altogether that push on it. And yeah, I don't.
The bullying thing I thought was interesting in our discussion. It was, you were kind of arguing for a conservative point of view on that, saying that you don't want to overprotect children.
I wouldn't even call that conservative, though. I would just say it's maybe a more youth-focused thing. After you go through the school system and your playground equipment's so protected you can't even challenge yourself anymore. With climbing and jumping and various things, they're saying now that kids have more anxiety than ever. It's because they've never really challenged themselves and forced them to do everything, and they think it's linked to things like that, and they're running tests in Europe right now. So I would say I don't think it's conservative. I don't hear old boomers talk about that on the conservative talk radio. It's more of modern parenting, or even kids that grew up through that saying this is really not as cool as it used to be, or I don't know. I guess that really can't be kids, but I don't know.
No, I think you were arguing sort of a conservative worldview in the following sense, that kind of a default defense of hierarchies and the way things and the norms, the way things are. So you were saying we need to not train kids, but expose, make it so they can handle the way things are, and bullying is just a fact of life. So those are the kind of things you were saying. I
was also talking about shame, how it's a tool of society to keep other members in check, especially youth. It's the way you get shamed in school, and then you learn not to do it again because you're embarrassed.
Yeah.
So I was alluding shaming to be similar to bullying. Like bullying can have a lasting effect and it can help keep norms together. Yeah,
But
again,
I was arguing more progressive side.
I don't think it's progressive conservative, because if you look at Peterson's let kids skateboard, that's not a left right thing.
I didn't say left right.
Well, okay, conservative, progressive. It has nothing to do with that, because I would say there are plenty of conservatives that would say don't let kids skateboard, don't let them. So I don't think that level of freedom and
Pro hierarchy. Then what do you want to call it? You were arguing adapting to the way things are. And I was talking about changing the way things are. So that's a fundamental different.
Okay, that would be progressive and conservative, but I don't think that's what I was arguing for.
I'm arguing that you were arguing for that. No, you were arguing for people being prepared to deal with bullying, and I was talking about how do you stop bullying and how do you change the norms. So you were talking about children adapting to the norms, and I was talking about changing the norms. So these are conservative, progressive positions. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just they are these general progressive, conservative, progressive positions.
Well, no, because if you look at the left, there's plenty of people on the left using bullying and shame to enforce their worldview. So I don't think it's a conservative, progressive thing at all.
I think you're talking about something different now than I just.
Well,
I was talking about specifically. When you were arguing about the value of letting children experience bullying, because bullying is part of society, that's a way of looking at society as a given. Okay, that's a kind of way of looking at society, which I would call conservative. Okay, and then a progressive way of looking at society is identifying those things and wanting to change the very society itself. So you don't want kids to have to try to learn to adapt to bullying. You want to get rid of bullying. Is the progressive way of looking at it. You can disagree, but I'm just saying I think those are different ways. There's worldviews.
Yeah, and like I said, there's plenty of progressives I would know, but maybe they're the extremists that would use bullying and shame.
But that's not related to that. I mean, it's not. How is that related?
How is that related?
Yeah.
Are people that claim to have progressive values? I mean.
But they would be trying to get rid of bullying. They may be hypocritical. That's hypocrisy.
Yeah, I gotcha. It's
That's not. So I'm talking about the professed values and the professed aims. Oops, I just.
No, that's not
that
you.
wasn't me?
I guess that's computer design. It's gonna do its thing.
Does that affect anything?
No.
Oh, okay.
That's just our feedback to see if anyone's talking to us.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the progressives, to steelman this a bit, the progressive side is definitely, we want to improve society, and if we can get rid of bullying, that's an improvement, and that's something we should aim for. I definitely agree with that. I just have it hard to say that it's conservatives' normal point to say, oh, we got to keep bullying, but
no, I didn't say that. Don't change my words. I didn't say conservatives say we got to keep bullying. I'm saying conservatives say bullying is a part of life and you need to be able to deal with it. They even conservatives may want to stop it. And progressives also recognize that it's a part of life, but it's an emphasis is what I'm talking about. So it's a kind of approach or attitude that is conservative and progressive. I think it's important to recognize these currents in human life, because we're continually circling around them, and they're continually pushing the conversation. And the goal is to incorporate both and to use both for the insights that they can give. But to kind of pretend that they're not there or somehow, or to not recognize the point of view that you are arguing from, is what I'm trying to say. You are arguing a conservative point of view. Maybe I'm wrong, but
I even forgot what we're arguing about now.
Bullying,
and
the idea of whether so is it a problem, and to what degree should we change it? So is it one of those things that we should ask the Lord to accept, or is it one of those things we should find the courage to change, and to what degree?
Yeah, and I think like I said, the aim is to minimize it as much as possible, because I don't think you could ever get rid of it, so to speak. And the other thing we brought up in the week during the week was the power dynamics of it too. It's someone that has more power, that's clearly exercising that power to hurt someone.
Yeah.
To give bullying a little more precision. And I think it's, like I said, we want to minimize it. And we do have some education now that talks about it and tries to explain that. But it's very hard to, when you recognize it, you got to recognize it, identify it, and then B, you got to step up and act, to have the courage, the bravery, if that's the right term, to step in and intercede. And I think that's where everyone kind of falls short, because we kind of know innately what's good and evil, or right or wrong. Might not be initially when we initially see it. Sometimes we don't know, but other times we do. And when it happens in a large group of people, I think hopefully someone will recognize what's going on. But
I don't know what. Yeah, I think on individual personal levels, we tend to know when something's evil or not evil, but on social levels, like, is it evil what's happening at the border right now, with the immigrants, or not? Is gay rights evil or not? Is sort of affirmative action evil or not? So, I think in various very concrete, very important dimensions of our collective life together, that is, as a nation, I don't know, there isn't much agreement on what's good and evil.
Yeah, well, even murder can be righteous. Every case is different, and there's so much context, especially when you're talking about nationwide issues or global issues. They would be solved if it was so cut and dry. I think
we were talking about genocide, but that was the week before, right? Just how, something is, you offhand, most people would say, well, it's kind of black and white, that's evil, but then, the so-called good book, the Bible, is...
Well, one of the examples I kind of had in my mind in the back of my head is necessarily more localized. Like, you can go to like a grocery store or a family restaurant, and you'll see parents disciplining their kids. And it could look horrible to you. Absolutely horrible, like the most evil thing you could do. But you really have no clue what's going on, the context, the thing. So it's hard to act sometimes because of that missing information.
Yeah.
Like, if you had people step in if they saw something going wrong, they could be completely right and save, help those kids out, or they could be completely wrong. And that's why we have like a whole division of child protective services that have to do a full investigation and really, look at everything. You can't just call the cops and have them take the kids right then and there.
And some people consider the very idea that the state can interfere in a family affair as evil. They consider that evil too. The very existence of a Department of Child Protection Services is considered evil by a fair number of people in the United States.
Well, I can understand that. There's a lot of different ways to parent. There's no one way, and parents are very judgmental about other parents. That's the other thing that's very easy to recognize. Obviously, they don't raise their kids the way you raise your kids. So there's a lot of debate and values and opinions about how to do it. And a lot of people consider the way that others raise their kids as evil.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people would consider teaching children religion as evil. And then on the other side, people would consider
not teaching religion
is evil. And that's a pretty big split. Because that's what, the problem with public education, right, is education, apart from just literally learning arithmetic in the 3 R's, right? What is it? Reading, arithmetic, and...
Reading, writing, arithmetic.
Okay. So apart from that, everything else is value-laden, Science is value-laden. History is value-laden. So, public education is teaching values. But we as a society do not agree what's evil and what's good in terms of values.
And I wonder if it hasn't been decided to this point to a certain degree whether it's actually just less important to the things we have agreed on. And that's why it's harder to come to these decisions, because there is these differences of values and personalities, and we it behooves us to integrate everyone into our world and society. You know, either that you have to have segregated societies where people with certain values have to go off to the island or another area. And to a certain extent, you know, America's a bunch of different states with a bunch of different rules, and you know, you don't like the community you're in, you can go find another one. That's I like the idea of that freedom to explore, but I wonder if these big issues have undecided for thousands of years. Because it's our job to integrate them all. And it's kind of tough when you take an issue like abortion we've talked about, where you can argue well on both sides. You know, the unborn child has rights, but when does it become an unborn child? And where's the woman's rights end? There's a discussion there. The woman definitely has rights, and the unborn, you know, when does it become a child? When does its rights take place? It's tough because they both have valid points, and it's a discussion that's been going on for quite a bit. Maybe that one only lasts a couple hundred years or so, but there's been other ones that have been going on for much longer. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but I'm sure there are more philosophical points from the Greeks that I know there's the trolley call problem, which is more of a pattern of a specific of a problem, right? It's like,
which one?
The trolley call problem is do you pull the lever and intentionally kill one person, or do nothing and let 5 people kill? Is it you know, there's these philosophical questions that we haven't answered for thousands of years, and because they're tough to answer, basically. So
in some ways, there's nothing new under the sun, but then in other ways, we are in a society now. You know, when democracy entered the world stage on a fairly large scale, I mean, it's always been there here and there once in a while, but the idea that humans are in charge of their destiny and should govern themselves, as opposed to a divinely ordained king or God himself, that is a very new idea, at least on a wide scale. So, in a way, we have not been dealing with that for thousands of years. It's just been about 300.
Yeah, and if you don't view us as God, so to speak, perfect rulers that we expect, that you realize we're extremely flawed individual, that you know, there's the best of us and the worst of us. If we ended up with the worst of us in a position of power, how we designed the system to minimize the least amount of damage they can do, which is a really interesting way to propose the question and think about things.
Which is kind of, I suppose, the way the founding fathers of this country said they were doing it, right? Just, you know, assume that people are not angels, and you have to kind of just keep structuring power to check and balance itself, and so it's pretty wise, I think.
And it builds on, like, was it Western culture jurisprudence that goes back more than 300 years. Everything they learned about the justice system that's helped progress Western civilization to the point it's now is we're continually iterating on it. That's clear, if anything. But at least it does have some roots in history, and hopefully all these changes we're making are improvements. But that's the whole thing. It's an experiment right now. We make little changes here and there, and we gotta continue having discussions to evaluate it, right? Let's say a life unexamined is not worth living.
On the other hand, over-examined isn't worth living either, right?
Yeah, right. Living life under a microscope,
flow, right?
Yeah, it's a balance, right? A balancing act. You got to take both in. Yeah. So.
Anything else?
I don't know. It's really hard to. It was really hard to get what Fry was his initial points, because he was talking about some things about politically correct and some things he didn't like politically correct. But after our discussions, I think it's harder for me for it to see him take a side, so to speak. Because if he meant one thing, that would change positions about everything else And it's kind of like this cognitive dissonance. You need to really have these things defined and see how they work together.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only odd man out really in this was Peterson, because I think Fry and Michelle and Dyson, I think they all really pretty much agree. Even because Michelle, at least Michelle was saying she didn't like fanatics either. She didn't like that sort of, and very few
Outrage
people
culture.
do, right? I mean,
Mhm.
very few people do. So then the question becomes: so what is it that they're calling political correctness? What is it exactly that Michelle and what's Dyson's first name?
Michael.
Michelle and Michael want to defend, and what Stephen is critiquing, and I'm not sure what it is.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that Peterson talks about is the size of the group. Like you're gonna, as the audience gets larger, your likeliness of offense goes up.
Mm-hmm.
So I wonder if the answer to the debate might be something along the lines. It depends who your audience is. What's the group?
Mm-hmm.
If it's just a small group of friends, you can be less politically correct. But if you're addressing the nation at large, being political correct is going to get you much further, because you're going to be more sensitive to everyone that's potentially listening, and then you'll effectively communicate your message better.
But political correctness is a term that is only used to critique the left. It's not used to critique the right, but I think that's unjust. Because if what we're critiquing is sort of fanaticism and preachiness, and that has nothing to do with left and right. That's quite true. Nothing to do with left and right.
Well, and political correctness doesn't mean preachy. You can be preachy about political correctness, but that's not the same thing.
Exactly. Political correctness, I think the first time we discussed this a couple months ago, we started by reading the Wikipedia definition of it, I think, which is good. I think that was really good, and that made sense of it. It's like, okay, that's what political correctness is. It's the idea of being aware of language and how it impacts traditionally marginalized groups. That's it. And then the problem becomes, I mean, once it becomes, I guess with Peterson's example of the forced speech, right? So the idea of using the pronoun he for a trans woman, it's tough to know what to do with that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is hard to know what to do with that.
Yeah, because that means everyone you got to interact with, you got to ask them their pronouns first thing before you can even get their attention. Or it's very cognitively load heavy. It's a difficult thing to create a society with that. But at the same time, it's a better society if we can solve that problem, right?
But what does it mean solving that problem? Because a lot of people would say it's a better society by getting rid of trans people and not even allowing that. So and if you do want to allow that and incorporate that, then you are solidly already in the progressive world. I mean, you are on the progressive side, whether you realize it or not. And I don't know. And so how do we have the actual discussion with everybody involved about that?
So you were saying that conservatives need to be called out on anti-political correctness more, or you're saying that you said it only applied. It felt like it was
that term is only used to criticize the left,
Gotcha.
as far as I can see. And then I mean, which is
So
as Dyson pointed out, it's ironic because that term was invented by the left to critique the left. So it was self-critique.
So can you give an example of how the left might use it to critique the right?
Political correctly? No, because political correctness is a good thing. So you don't use it. It wouldn't
as
be,
a critique. Gotcha.
How could you use it to? I mean.
So they could say, "Oh, that guy gave a politically correct speech," in that way.
I mean, actually, there's two.
Gotcha.
I mean, I think when the left was using it to self-critique itself, politically correct, I think meant party line, right? You're following whatever the Kremlin says to do.
Very dogmatic.
Very dogmatic. I like that.
Ideological.
Yeah. So I think that's what that originally meant. But then there's a more modern meaning of political correctness is
used derogatorily
to avoid the positive meaning of it is to be aware and conscious of language that is maintaining the powerlessness of traditionally marginalized groups, something
Gotcha.
like that. So there's no way to use that against the right because they are kind of by definition the status quo, which by definition is the power structure that oppresses the marginalized groups.
It wasn't the left need to use the right, it's how the right needs to use it. They need to stop using it derogatorily. They need to use it.
Or yeah, I guess, or just say, if what they mean by if what they mean by you're being politically correct is you're being preachy or dogmatic, then say that. But I think when they use the term politically correct, what they're really doing is even if they're not conscious about it, they are fighting the deeper social battles about, from a conservative point of view, fighting against the empowerment of some of these groups. So I think what's really going on is they don't want gay people to be completely equal, and they don't want women to be in positions of power, and they don't want whatever it is.
Yeah, we talked about how it could be bigotry or ignorance. It's usually one of one of those categories or the other is what you were telling me, and I think the ignorance is probably the majority for a lot of it. At least you could hope. I always have a positive outlook on things, so I like to think that. But even if you tried to educate them, some of them are callous and they don't necessarily want to open their empathy up to that. And I think that's a challenge and a problem.
Yeah, right.
And it is at that point when they refuse, that's maybe when they fall into the bigotry category, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's those.
What was the one example when I kept saying, they're just not getting it. They're not in their shoes. What was it? Or was that you?
I don't remember.
Oh, okay.
I don't remember that example. But it's racist to be ignorant because they push back against the charge. No, you said not all of them are bigots. Some are bigots. That's why they push back. Others are just ignorance. Yeah, I guess tried to had an argument that tried to say all, but you made it clear. And I think that's interesting, and I've been thinking about that in the last day or two about, okay, so, you have some people are empathetic, and you got to have a society of empathy. You can't have a society full of sociopaths. So they're definitely, it's better. It's what the aim should be. But at the same time, it's like there are limits. You can't be empathetic about everything. It's just too much input. You get too sensitive, and then you're always hurt. Like, we have these self-defense mechanisms that kick in. And because of our values, we're only going to pay attention to certain things. And I think we can see that when we choose the conservative or liberal values to a certain degree. Where it's very, there's these logical things and these emotional values that stack up that develop these patterns on either one side or the other of an axis. And just like you said, the conservatives are going to be callous about these issues. And I think that's a hard time is when you call them bigots, they don't feel like they're the same thing as someone that actually hates just because they're callous. So it's almost a lack of terms.
Callous.
Or not wanting to be empathetic.
I don't. I mean, I don't know. Of course, there's no. I mean, there are all sorts of conservatives, right? So
yes.
But I mean, I think one of the straw man arguments against conservatism is to call them callous or to call them
they don't feel at all
or unfeeling, which I don't think. I mean, is sometimes. So I think very often, though, conservative positions are ignorance in that sense, in the sense that they haven't yet quite fully experienced the position of the people that they're somehow.
But when they refuse, they say, "Well, you should read this book on trans rights or something." And they go, "Well,
or you should read the Bible or something like that." It's usually what the book that you refer to.
Conservatives refer to the Bible, right?
Oh,
it's going from the progressive side.
I see. Yeah.
And they refuse to open themselves, take that content that was made to educate and inform them, so they would be less callous or less ignorant and be more empathetic. And as soon as they refuse that step, like I said, there's a category of bigotry where they hate them. Where there's those people that exist. But there's this in between those two, and since it doesn't have a label or anything, being called that label that you're not it's very triggering, right? It can make them very upset and say, "How dare you? Because of my values, the way I feel about things,
right? Exactly.
You're labeling me as someone with hate, and I don't hate. I care about all these things. I care about you and society more than you'll ever think."
Right.
But I don't care about this, or I don't want to be.
Or I just honestly disagree. I remember during the Proposition 8 thing, and the pro-gay marriage side, you know, their favorite motto was like "Stop the hate," with the number 8, right? Stop the hate, 8, and I felt that so often missed the mark. It's like, wow, there isn't a lot of hate against gay people on the majority of people who are voting against gay marriage. It's just not like hate. And so
it's just like form of bullying. It's using shame, where there's
yes,
probably a more effective tool that
right.
if you aim for the middle and less status seek and painting with a negative brush, you probably can get a lot more people over to that. But if you're very ideological and dogmatic, that you're just going to say, oh, they're just plain evil, they're inhuman, they're monsters, and that's why we need to and then that can easily
on all sides people can be callous on all sides and really kind of mislabel the other side as unfeeling and ignorant.
And that's what I think is at the core of the culture war. It's like, what should we be empathetic about? That's the tug and pull, and that's the discussion. And when are we allowed to be callous? And what are these other things, these categories we're in? Are we all? We were starting to talk. Are we all bigots? Are we all racists? There's some people that think that, and these are the kind of topics we're exploring. So, a lot of food for thought. I think we'll go ahead and wrap it up there if you're good. Yep. All right. Thanks everyone for joining us. Hopefully you like something we talked about or we said something wrong. Let us know in the comments, and try to post this video on Facebook for the people that usually tune in there. And hopefully we'll be back next week with more people. It's always hard to do the show with just 2.
Yeah, you need a kind of a 3.
Yeah, especially when the ball gets dropped or you get tired and you forget the train of thought. That third person really helps out. So thanks for tuning in. Thanks for giving us a watch.